The wind carried the scent of dust and danger as Grace, Lowry stood on the porch of her family's small ranch house, staring at the horizon where her future loomed darker than the gathering storm clouds. Her 18th birthday had arrived with a death sentence marriage to Silas Montgomery, a man of 45 with cold eyes and a reputation that made mothers hide their daughters when he rode into town. The year was 1876, and Promise Creek, Colorado, was a small settlement clinging to existence in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains. The gold rush had come and gone, leaving behind those too stubborn or too broken to leave. Grace's father, once a prosperous rancher, had fallen into debt and desperation after her mother's death 3 winters ago. "You'll be leaving at first light," her father's voice was hollow behind her. "Montgomery has paid your bride price. It's done, Grace." She didn't turn to face him. "I'm not cattle to be sold, Father. No, you're my daughter and I've failed you." His voice cracked. "The drought took our cattle, the bank's taking our land. Montgomery offered to clear my debts, said he needed a young wife to give him sons." Grace gripped the porch railing, her knuckles white. At 18, with honey-brown hair that fell in waves down her back and eyes the color of summer sage, she had caught the attention of several young men in town, but none had the means to save her father from ruin. "I heard he buried 3 wives already," she whispered. Her father said nothing, which was answer enough. The night passed with Grace lying awake, listening to the coyotes howl in the distance, their cries mirroring the despair in her heart. When dawn broke, she dressed in her best blue calico dress, packed her few belongings, and kissed her young brothers goodbye. They clung to her, not understanding why their sister was leaving. The Montgomery Ranch stood 10 miles north, a sprawling property with more cattle than any man had right to own while others starved. The wedding was to be held that afternoon, a hasty affair with only the local preacher as witness. Grace sat rigid in the wagon beside her father, each jolt of the wheels bringing her closer to a life she couldn't bear to imagine. They were halfway to Montgomery's ranch when they heard the thunder of hooves approaching from behind. "Whoa!" called a deep voice, and her father pulled the wagon to a stop. Grace turned to see a tall figure on horseback, silhouetted against the rising sun. As he drew closer, she could make out a man perhaps in his late 20s, with broad shoulders and a face weathered by sun and wind. His eyes, startlingly blue beneath the brim of his hat, locked with hers. "Morning," he said, tipping his hat to Grace before addressing her father. "Name's Grant Dawson. I understand you're heading to Montgomery's place." Her father's hand tightened on the reins. "What business is it of yours, stranger?" Grant Dawson swung down from his horse, a magnificent black stallion that stood restlessly beside the wagon. "I heard in town that Montgomery's marrying a girl today. That true, my daughter?" her father admitted reluctantly. "It's arranged." Grant's eyes never left Grace's face. "Is that what you want, miss?" No one had asked her that question before. The unexpected kindness in his voice nearly broke her composure. "What I want doesn't matter. It matters to me." He stepped closer and Grace caught the scent of leather and open plains. "I've been tracking Montgomery for months. The man's wanted in 3 territories for fraud and worse. Those wives of his didn't die of natural causes." Her father paled. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Montgomery's not marrying another innocent girl. I'm a federal marshal and I'm here to arrest him." Grant reached into his coat and produced a badge that glinted in the sunlight. Hope fluttered in Grace's chest, wild and painful. "You have proof of this?" "Enough to hang him twice over." Grant's expression softened as he looked at her. "But we need to move quickly. If he suspects I'm close, he'll run." Her father shook his head in disbelief. "Even if what you say is true, Marshal, my debts remain. The bank will take everything." Grant mounted his horse again, his decision made. "Sir, with your permission, I'll escort your daughter back to town while you return home. When this is over, we can discuss a more suitable arrangement for your family's future." "And what arrangement might that be?" her father asked suspiciously. Grant's gaze returned to Grace, something unreadable in his eyes. "Sir, I've been looking to settle in these parts. I've got savings and a claim on good grazing land near the river. What I don't have is a wife." He addressed Grace directly now. "I know this is sudden, miss, but I'm offering you a choice. I won't force you into anything, but I'll say this plainly: she'll be my bride if she'll have me, once Montgomery's brought to justice." Grace's heart hammered in her chest. This stranger was offering her salvation, but could she trust him? "Why would you do this for someone you don't know?" "Because no woman should be sold to a monster," he said simply. "And because the moment I saw you, I knew I couldn't ride away." There was something in his direct gaze that spoke of honesty, a rare commodity in these parts. Grace made her decision. "I'll go with the marshal, father." Her father hesitated, torn between desperation and duty. "You sure about this, girl?" "I'm sure I don't want to be Montgomery's wife," she answered firmly. "As for the rest, time will tell." Grant reached down and offered his hand. Without hesitation, Grace took it and allowed him to pull her up behind him on the horse. The warmth of his back against her chest felt strangely right, as if she'd found shelter in an unexpected place. "I'll bring her back safe," Grant promised her father. "You have my word." As they rode away, Grace held tight to this man she barely knew, her heart racing with fear and something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. They hadn't gone more than a mile when Grant guided his horse off the main trail, following a narrow path that wound through a stand of pines. "Where are we going?" Grace asked, her arms still wrapped around his waist. "Somewhere safe," he replied, his voice carried back to her on the wind. "Montgomery has men watching the roads. If they see you with me instead of arriving with your father, they'll know something's wrong." The path opened onto a small clearing where a cabin stood, smoke curling from its chimney. A woman with silver-streaked hair stepped onto the porch, a shotgun resting casually in her arms. "That you, Grant?" she called. "It's me, Martha. I've brought company." The woman lowered her weapon and squinted at Grace. "This the Montgomery girl?" "This is Grace Lowry," Grant corrected, helping Grace down from the horse. "Grace, this is Martha Wilson. Her husband Tom and I served together in the war. They've been helping me track Montgomery." Martha's weathered face softened. "Come inside, child. You look like you could use some coffee and a moment's peace." The cabin was small but clean, with a quilt-covered bed in one corner and a table set with 3 plates. A man with a gray beard sat whittling by the fire, his eyes sharp as he assessed the newcomers. "Tom, this is Grace," Grant said. "She's agreed to help us." Tom set down his knife and wood. "Brave girl, Montgomery's not a man to cross." Grace sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. "What exactly do you want me to do?" Grant pulled up a chair across from her. "Montgomery doesn't know me by sight, but he knows someone's been asking questions. I need to get close enough to gather the final evidence against him and make the arrest. And you need me because—" "Because he's expecting a bride," Grant said simply. "I need you to return to your father's ranch as planned. Montgomery will send men to escort you to his property tomorrow. I'll accompany them as a hired gun, someone your father insisted come along to ensure your safety." Grace's hands trembled slightly. "You want me to go through with it, to pretend I'm still willing to marry him?" "Only until I can get what I need," Grant assured her. "One day at most. Then I'll arrest him and you'll be free." Martha placed a cup of coffee in front of Grace. "It's dangerous, girl. No one would blame you for refusing." Grace wrapped her fingers around the warm cup. And if I refuse, what happens to my father? To my brothers? Grant's expression was grim. Montgomery isn't known for his forgiveness. He might take your father's land anyway, or worse. And what about your offer? Was that just a ruse to get me away from my father? The cabin fell silent. Tom and Martha exchanged glances and discreetly moved toward the door, murmuring about checking on the horses. When they were alone, Grant leaned forward, his blue eyes earnest. No, it wasn't a ruse. I meant what I said, though I know it must sound mad to you. I've been alone a long time, Grace. Tracking men like Montgomery, seeing what they do to the innocent, it hardens something inside you. He paused, searching for words. When I saw you in that wagon, looking like you were being led to your execution, something broke open in me. I don't expect you to understand it. I barely do myself. Grace studied his face, this stranger who offered her a different kind of bargain. And if I help you catch Montgomery, then what? Am I obligated to marry you instead? No, he said firmly. You'll be free to make your own choice. If that choice includes me, I'd be the most fortunate man in the territory. If not, I'll still help your family. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Grace took a deep breath. I'll help you, Marshal Dawson, not because of any promise of marriage, but because no other woman should suffer at Montgomery's hands. A slow smile spread across Grant's face, transforming his weathered features. That's more than fair. He extended his hand across the table. Partners, then. Grace placed her hand in his, feeling the strength and gentleness in his grip. Partners. As night fell, they finalized their plan. Grace would return to her father's ranch at dawn, explaining that the marshal had verified Montgomery's criminal activities, but needed her help to bring him to justice. Grant would arrive shortly after, posing as a hired gun named Jim Cooper. Together they would travel to Montgomery's ranch, where Grant would gather the evidence he needed while keeping Grace safe. Martha prepared a simple supper, and afterward, she showed Grace to the small bedroom. You take the bed, dear. The men and I will manage with blankets by the fire. Grace sat on the edge of the bed, the enormity of what she'd agreed to finally sinking in. Do you think we can trust him? She asked quietly. Martha smiled. Grant Dawson. With my life. He saved my Tom during the war, carried him 15 miles with a bullet in his own leg. Never met a more honorable man. She paused, studying Grace. But that's not what you're really asking, is it? Grace flushed. It's just the way he looked at me, the things he said. How can a man feel something so quickly for a stranger? Some souls recognize each other right away, Martha said simply. Doesn't mean you have to return his feelings, but don't dismiss them as false either. She patted Grace's hand. Now get some rest. Tomorrow will test us all. Sleep came in fitful bursts for Grace, her dreams filled with wedding veils that turned to nooses and blue eyes that watched her from the shadows. She woke before dawn, heart pounding, to find Grant already up, checking his weapons by the fire's dying light. Couldn't sleep either. He asked softly, too much thinking. Grace wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and joined him by the fire. I'm afraid. You'd be a fool not to be, he replied. But remember, I'll be with you every step of the way. She studied his profile in the firelight. Tell me something true about yourself, Marshal. Something that isn't about badges or hunting criminals. Grant set down the revolver he'd been cleaning. I was a teacher before the war, he said after a moment. Taught in a one-room schoolhouse in Pennsylvania. I loved it, watching children discover the world through books, seeing their faces light up when they understood something new. What happened? Grace asked, surprised by this revelation. The war came. I fought. I saw things that changed me. He stared into the embers. Afterward, I couldn't go back to that classroom. Couldn't be that person anymore. The law gave me purpose, a way to protect instead of destroy. Grace reached out impulsively and touched his hand. "I think that teacher is still inside you." His fingers curled around hers. "Maybe. With the right reason to find him again." They sat in companionable silence until the first light of dawn streaked the sky. Martha and Tom stirred, and preparations began in earnest. Grace changed back into her blue dress, and Martha helped her braid her hair. "Remember," Grant instructed as they prepared to leave, "from now on I'm Jim Cooper. Don't call me Grant or Marshall under any circumstances." Grace nodded, her stomach knotting with anxiety. "What if Montgomery doesn't believe our story? What if he recognizes you?" "He won't," Grant assured her. "And he's too arrogant to suspect a trap. Men like him believe themselves untouchable." Tom handed Grace up onto a bay mare they'd saddled for her. "You've got spine, girl. You'll do fine." The ride back to her father's ranch was tense but uneventful. When they arrived, her father rushed from the house, relief and confusion warring on his face. "Grace, thank God." He helped her down from the horse, then eyed Grant suspiciously. "What's going on? Who's this man?" Grace quickly explained their plan, watching her father's expression shift from skepticism to grim understanding. "It's madness," he muttered. "Montgomery will kill you both if he suspects." "Not if we're careful," Grant said, "but we need to move quickly. His men will be here soon to collect Grace." Her father paced the small kitchen, running a hand through his thinning hair. "And I'm supposed to just let my daughter walk into a murderer's house?" "I'm going, Father," Grace said firmly. "With or without your blessing. This may be our only chance to stop him." Her father looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. "When did you get so brave?" "I've always been brave," she replied. "You just never had cause to notice." True to Grant's prediction, 3 riders appeared on the horizon just before noon. Grace's younger brothers were sent to a neighbor's farm for safety, and Grant positioned himself on the porch, playing the role of the hired protection. Montgomery's men were rough-looking characters, unshaven and heavily armed. Their leader, a man with a jagged scar across his cheek, dismounted and approached the house. "We've come for the bride," he announced without preamble. Grace's father stepped forward. "This is my daughter, Grace, and this is Jim Cooper," he nodded toward Grant. "He'll be accompanying her to ensure her safe arrival," the scarred man sneered. "Mr. Montgomery didn't mention no escort." "Mr. Montgomery isn't her father," came the cold reply. "I insist, or there's no wedding." A tense moment passed before the man shrugged. "Your funeral, Cooper. Mount up, both of you. We're burning daylight." Grace exchanged a final look with her father, trying to convey everything she couldn't say aloud. Then she allowed Grant to help her onto her horse, his hand lingering reassuringly on hers for just a moment. The journey to Montgomery's ranch took nearly 3 hours, with Grace and Grant riding side by side, surrounded by the 3 guards. They spoke little, aware of being watched, but Grant's presence beside her gave Grace courage she didn't know she possessed. Montgomery's property was even more impressive up close, a sprawling main house built of stone and timber, with numerous outbuildings and corrals filled with prize livestock. As they rode into the yard, Grace caught sight of a small cemetery on a hillside behind the house. 3 markers stood in a neat row, 3 wives, she thought with a chill. A man emerged from the house as they dismounted. Silas Montgomery was tall and broad-shouldered, his hair and beard more salt than pepper. His face might have been handsome once, but years of hard living had carved deep lines around his mouth and eyes. Those eyes, coal-black and penetrating, fixed on Grace with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "So this is my bride," he said, his voice surprisingly cultured. "Even prettier than your father described." Grace forced herself to curtsy, keeping her eyes downcast. "Mr. Montgomery, call me Silas, my dear." We're to be family after all. He turned his attention to Grant. And who might you be? Jim Cooper, Grant said, tipping his hat. Mr. Lowry hired me to see his daughter safely delivered. Montgomery's smile didn't reach his eyes. How thoughtful. Well, your job is done, Cooper. You can collect your pay and be on your way. Actually, Grant said easily, I'm paid through tomorrow, after the wedding. Mr. Lowry was quite insistent. A flash of irritation crossed Montgomery's face before he masked it with another smile. Of course. We're having a small celebration tonight and the preacher arrives tomorrow noon. You're welcome to stay in the bunkhouse with the men. Much obliged, Grant replied. Montgomery turned back to Grace, extending his arm. Come, my dear. Let me show you your new home. With one last glance at Grant, Grace took Montgomery's arm and allowed herself to be led into the house. The interior was lavishly furnished with imported carpets and heavy furniture, a stark contrast to her father's modest home. Your predecessors had simple tastes, Montgomery said, guiding her through the rooms. I look forward to seeing what changes you might make as mistress of the house. It's very grand, Grace managed, fighting to keep her voice steady. Though I notice you keep their portraits. She nodded toward 3 paintings on the wall, each depicting a solemn-faced woman. My wives were dear to me, Montgomery replied, each taken too soon, but you're young and strong. I expect you'll thrive where they faltered. The threat beneath his words was unmistakable. Grace suppressed a shudder as he showed her to a bedroom upstairs. This will be yours until tomorrow, he said. Then, of course, you'll join me in the master's suite. He touched her cheek with cold fingers. Rest now. Dinner is at 7. When he left, Grace sank onto the bed, trembling. The room was beautiful, with lace curtains and a view of the mountains, but it felt like a prison cell. On the dressing table sat a silver-backed brush and mirror, monogrammed with the initials of Montgomery's last wife. Grace spent the afternoon exploring the house under the watchful eye of the housekeeper, Mrs. Finch, a thin woman with pinched features who answered questions with monosyllables. Grace caught glimpses of Grant through the windows as he helped with the horses, playing his role perfectly. Dinner was an uncomfortable affair, with Montgomery at the head of the table, Grace to his right, and various ranch hands filling the remaining seats. Grant was conspicuously placed at the far end, though his eyes rarely left Grace. Montgomery dominated the conversation, speaking at length about his business dealings and his plans for expanding his already vast holdings. He placed his hand over Grace's several times, his touch lingering inappropriately. I've set aside a considerable sum for our honeymoon, he told her. We'll travel to San Francisco. I have associates there who are eager to meet my new bride. That's very generous, Grace murmured, wondering what these associates really were. Trafficking in young women seemed all too possible for a man like Montgomery. After dinner, the men retired to the study for drinks and cigars. Grace was about to retreat upstairs when Montgomery caught her arm. Join us, my dear, he insisted. I want you to become familiar with all aspects of our life together. The study was dark and masculine, with mounted animal heads on the walls and a gun cabinet displaying an impressive collection of weapons. The air was thick with cigar smoke as Montgomery poured whiskey for himself and his guests. Grant stood near the window, nursing his drink slowly. When their eyes met briefly, he gave an almost imperceptible nod. The plan was proceeding. Cooper, Montgomery called suddenly, you're very quiet. What brings a man like you to these parts? Grant shrugged. Work where I can find it. War ended and a lot of us had nowhere to go. Which side did you fight for? Montgomery pressed. Whichever paid better, Grant replied with a lazy smile that didn't reach his eyes. Montgomery laughed. A mercenary, I like that. Honest, at least. He turned to Grace. You see, my dear, this is the sort of man your father hired to protect your virtue, a sellsword with no loyalty beyond his purse. Grace kept her expression neutral. We all do what we must to survive, Mr. Montgomery. Indeed we do, he agreed, his eyes glittering. Indeed we do. As the evening wore on, Montgomery drank heavily, becoming increasingly possessive, pulling Grace against him whenever she tried to create distance. His men watched with knowing smirks that made her stomach turn. Only Grant's steady presence in the room kept her from panicking. "Perhaps I should retire," she suggested when the clock struck 10. "Tomorrow will be a significant day." "Of course," Montgomery slurred slightly, "though I'm tempted to forego tradition and claim my wedding night early." His men laughed crudely. Grant's hand tightened around his glass, but his face revealed nothing. "I would prefer to wait," Grace said firmly. "As you said, I'm to be your wife, not your entertainment." Montgomery's eyes narrowed, but after a tense moment he nodded. "As you wish. Mrs. Finch will show you to your room." Grace curtsied and left the study, feeling Montgomery's gaze burning into her back. In the hallway, she nearly collided with Mrs. Finch, who had apparently been listening at the door. "This way, miss," the housekeeper said tersely, leading her upstairs. Once in her room, Grace paced anxiously, wondering how Grant planned to gather his evidence. The moon rose high, casting silver light through the windows, and still she waited, unable to sleep. A soft knock at her door startled her. She opened it cautiously to find Mrs. Finch standing there, her face grave. "May I come in, miss?" Grace stepped aside, puzzled by this late visit. The housekeeper closed the door quietly behind her. "Your friend Cooper asked me to give you this," she whispered, pressing a folded note into Grace's hand, "and to tell you to be ready at first light." Grace unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. 2 words were written in a firm hand. "Evidence found. You're helping us." Grace asked, studying the older woman's face. Mrs. Finch's mouth tightened. "I've worked here through 3 mistresses, watched them wither and die while he paraded their inheritance. The last one, Elizabeth, was kind to me. She knew what was happening, showed me the poison he was putting in her tea." Her voice broke. "I was too afraid to help her then. I won't make that mistake again." "What evidence did Grant find?" "Letters, records, proof he murdered his wives for their money and property." Mrs. Finch glanced nervously at the door. "Cooper's in the study now. Montgomery passed out drunk, as he often does, but he needs to finish and get out before the guards make their rounds." Grace clutched the woman's hands. "Thank you for everything." Mrs. Finch nodded once, then slipped from the room as quietly as she had come. Grace changed out of her nightgown and back into her dress, packing her few belongings. Then she sat by the window, watching the moon cast shadows across the yard, waiting for dawn and whatever it would bring. She must have dozed, for she woke with a start to the sound of raised voices. The sky was just beginning to lighten with the first hint of sunrise. Grace rushed to the window and saw Grant surrounded by Montgomery's men in the yard below. Montgomery himself stood on the porch, rifle in hand. "Thought you could steal from me, Cooper," he roared. "Or whatever your real name is." Grace's heart plummeted. Their plan had failed. Without thinking, she grabbed her bag and ran downstairs, bursting onto the porch just as one of the men struck Grant across the face, sending him to his knees. "Stop," she cried. "Please don't hurt him." Montgomery turned to her, his face contorted with rage. "Your protector is a thief, my dear. Found him in my study going through my private papers." "He's not a thief," Grace said, her mind racing. He came with me because I asked him to." "Because I was afraid." Montgomery's eyes narrowed. "Afraid of what, exactly?" "Of you," she whispered, forcing tears to her eyes. "Of the rumors about your other wives. Jim, he's my friend. I begged him to come to help me escape if you..." Her performance seemed to be working. Montgomery's expression shifted from rage to something almost like amusement. "So the little bride has claws," he murmured, "and a lover on the side." Grant, blood trickling from his split lip, caught her eye. His almost imperceptible shake of the head told her he didn't have the evidence, or worse, had been caught before securing it. "He's not my lover," Grace insisted. "Just a friend who cares about my welfare." Montgomery laughed coldly. "A very devoted friend to risk his life breaking into my study." He gestured to his men. "Take him to the barn. We'll decide what to do with him after the wedding." "No." Grace grabbed Montgomery's arm. "Please, if you hurt him, I'll never forgive you. I'll never be a proper wife to you." Montgomery studied her, calculation in his dark eyes. "You care for this man." It wasn't a question. Grace swallowed hard. "I care that an innocent man not be harmed because of my fears." "Innocent?" Montgomery snorted. "I think not." He turned to his men. "Change of plans, bring the preacher now. The wedding happens immediately." "The preacher isn't due until noon," one of the men protested. "Then go get him," Montgomery snapped. "And you," he seized Grace's arm, "will prepare yourself to become Mrs. Montgomery within the hour. Any further defiance and your friend dies slowly." Grace was marched back upstairs by Mrs. Finch, who whispered frantically as soon as they were alone. "It's worse than we thought. He found Cooper in the study, but Cooper had already hidden the evidence in the stables. We need to delay somehow." "How long until the real marshal arrives?" Grace asked, remembering that Grant had sent word to his colleagues the previous day. "Not until afternoon, if he's coming at all." The housekeeper wrung her hands. "Montgomery will have killed Cooper by then and forced you to marry him." Grace paced the room, mind racing. "Then we need to create a distraction. Something to postpone the wedding and give Grant time to escape." Mrs. Finch looked doubtful. "What could possibly—" She was interrupted by shouts from outside. They rushed to the window to see flames leaping from one of the distant outbuildings. Men ran toward it, yelling for water. "The distraction found us," Grace breathed. "Who would have?" Mrs. Finch's eyes widened. "Tom and Martha Wilson. Cooper mentioned they'd be nearby." Hope surged through Grace. "This is our chance. We need to get to Grant while everyone's focused on the fire." Quickly donning a shawl to cover her distinctive dress, Grace followed Mrs. Finch down the back stairs and through the kitchen. The yard was chaos, with men rushing to form a bucket brigade. Montgomery was nowhere in sight. They slipped into the barn, where they found Grant tied to a post, a guard dozing on a hay bale nearby. Mrs. Finch picked up a shovel and, with surprising strength, brought it down on the guard's head. He crumpled without a sound. "Remind me never to cross you, Mrs. Finch," Grant muttered as Grace untied him. "The evidence?" Mrs. Finch asked urgently. Grant nodded toward a loose board in the wall. "Hidden there. Letters proving he poisoned all 3 wives, plus records of their properties he's claimed. It's enough." Grace retrieved the packet of papers while Grant rubbed feeling back into his wrists. "Now what? The marshal isn't due for hours." "Change of plans," Grant said grimly. "We need to get you away from here now. Tom and Martha will meet us at Widow's Creek with fresh horses." "And Montgomery?" Grace asked. "Justice will find him," Grant promised. "But your safety comes first." They had almost reached the barn door when it burst open. Montgomery stood there, rifle raised, his face a mask of fury. "I thought you might try something like this," he snarled. "Did you really think I'd be fooled by a simple fire?" Grant pushed Grace behind him. "It's over, Montgomery. I have proof of your crimes. 3 murders, fraud, probably more. You'll hang for what you've done." "The only one dying today is you," Montgomery replied, aiming his rifle at Grant's chest. "And then my reluctant bride will learn the cost of betrayal." Everything happened in an instant. Montgomery's finger tightened on the trigger. Mrs. Finch lunged forward with a cry. The rifle discharged with a deafening roar. And then Mrs. Finch was falling, red blossoming across her chest. "No!" Grace screamed, dropping to her knees beside the housekeeper. Montgomery looked momentarily stunned but recovered quickly, working to reload his rifle. Grant seized the opportunity, tackling him to the ground. The two men grappled in the dirt, each fighting for control of the weapon. Mrs. Finch clutched Grace's hand, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Run," she whispered. "Don't let her death be for nothing." Grace squeezed her hand, tears streaming down her face. "I won't, I promise." A second shot rang out and Grace looked up in horror, certain Grant had been killed. But it was Montgomery who lay still, a red stain spreading across his shirt. Grant stood over him, the smoking rifle in his hands. "Is he?" Grace couldn't finish the question. "Wounded, not dead," Grant replied, his voice hard. "Though it's better than he deserves." He knelt beside Mrs. Finch, checking her wound with gentle hands. His expression told Grace everything she needed to know. "I'm sorry," Mrs. Finch whispered. "So sorry I didn't help the others." "You helped me," Grace told her, tears falling freely now. "You saved us both." A faint smile touched the housekeeper's lips. Then her eyes fixed on something distant, and with a soft sigh she was gone. There was no time to mourn. Already men were returning from the fire, drawn by the sound of gunshots. Grant helped Grace to her feet. "We need to go. Now." They ran for the stables, where Grant quickly saddled 2 horses. Behind them, shouts indicated the discovery of Montgomery's body. As they galloped away from the ranch, bullets whizzed past their heads, but soon they were out of range, racing toward Widow's Creek. Tom and Martha were waiting as promised, with fresh horses and supplies. There was no time for explanations. Montgomery's men would be in pursuit any minute. "Head north," Tom advised, handing Grant a rifle. "Cross the river at Miller's Ford. The marshal and his deputies should be coming from the east. If you miss them, continue to Silverton. The sheriff there owes me a favor." Grant clasped Tom's hand. "I can't thank you enough." "Just get that evidence to the right people," Tom replied. "And keep the girl safe." They rode hard for hours, following game trails and creek beds to obscure their tracks. By nightfall they had seen no sign of pursuit, but Grant insisted they press on, stopping only when the horses needed rest. "Where exactly are we going?" Grace asked as they paused to water the animals at a small stream. "There's a line shack about 3 miles ahead," Grant replied. "We can shelter there tonight. Tomorrow we'll try to intercept the marshal's party." The line shack was little more than a 1-room cabin with a sagging roof, but it offered protection from the elements and any searching eyes. Grant built a small fire in the stone fireplace while Grace tended to the horses. When she returned, she found him sitting on a rough wooden bench, head in his hands. She sat beside him, feeling the weight of the day's events settling over them both. "Mrs. Finch," she said softly, "she saved your life. And I couldn't save hers." Grant's voice was thick with guilt. "Just like I couldn't save those other women Montgomery killed." Grace took his hand, feeling the calluses and strength there. "You saved me, and you've ensured Montgomery will never hurt anyone again." He looked at her then, his blue eyes haunted. "When I heard that shot, when I thought for a moment it might have hit you instead." He couldn't continue. Impulsively, Grace leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. It was a brief kiss, gentle and questioning, but it sent warmth flowing through her veins. When she pulled back, Grant was looking at her with wonder. "Grace, I know we barely know each other," she interrupted. "And I know your offer of marriage was probably just part of your plan to save me. But today, when I thought Montgomery might kill you, I realized something. Life is too short and too precious to waste." Grant cupped her face in his hands. "It wasn't just part of the plan," he said softly. "When I said I wanted you as my bride, I meant every word, but I won't hold you to anything. Once we reach safety, you're free to go wherever you choose." Grace smiled, the first genuine smile in what felt like years. "What if I choose to stay with you?" His answer was another kiss, deeper this time, filled with promise and passion that made her heart race. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "When this is over," he promised, "we'll do things properly. I'll court you as you deserve if that's what you want." Grace laughed softly. "I think we've moved well beyond conventional courtship, Marshal Dawson." They shared the cabin's single bedroll that night, holding each other for warmth and comfort, though Grant was careful to maintain the boundaries of propriety. As Grace drifted toward sleep in the circle of his arms, she felt safer than she had in years. Dawn broke clear and cold. They ate a quick breakfast of jerky and hardtack, then set off toward the rendezvous point where they hoped to meet the marshal's party. The day was uneventful, which Grant took as a good sign. "Montgomery's men would have caught up by now if they were still pursuing us," he reasoned. "Either they're waiting in ambush ahead, or they've given up the chase. Or they returned to their wounded employer," Grace suggested. "Without Montgomery giving orders, they might not be so eager to follow us." As they crested a ridge overlooking a wide valley, Grant spotted a dust cloud in the distance. "Riders," he said, pulling out a small spyglass. "At least 6 of them coming from the east." "The marshal?" Grace asked hopefully. Grant studied the approaching group. "Yes. I recognize Hardin's buckskin horse. That's them." He looked relieved for the first time since their escape. They rode down to meet the lawmen, who greeted Grant with obvious respect. Marshal Hardin, a grizzled veteran with sharp eyes, listened intently to their story and examined the evidence they'd recovered. "This is solid work, Dawson," he said approvingly. "More than enough to put Montgomery away for good if he survives his wound." "And Mrs. Finch?" Grant asked. "She deserves a proper burial." "We'll see to it," Hardin promised. "And to Montgomery, I've sent 2 men ahead to secure the ranch and place him under arrest." They made camp that night with the marshal's party, the presence of additional lawmen allowing them to finally relax their vigilance. Grace sat beside the fire, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, watching Grant confer with Hardin. "What happens now?" she asked when he returned to her side. "Hardin wants me to testify at Montgomery's trial," Grant explained. "After that—" He hesitated. "I've been thinking about what you said about the teacher still being inside me. Maybe it's time I stopped chasing outlaws and tried building something instead." "Like a school?" Grace asked. "Like a home," he corrected softly. "With you if you'll have me." Grace's heart swelled. "I think I'd like that very much, Marshal Dawson." He smiled, taking her hand. "Grant," he reminded her. "Just Grant now." The journey back to Promise Creek took 3 days. When they arrived, Grace's father rushed from the house, embracing his daughter with tears in his eyes. "Thank God," he kept saying. "When we heard about the shooting at Montgomery's place, I feared the worst." Grace introduced him properly to Grant, explaining everything that had happened. Her father listened in amazement, occasionally shaking his head in disbelief. "And now?" he asked when they'd finished their tale. "What comes next?" Grant cleared his throat. "Sir, with your permission, I'd like to court your daughter, properly this time." Her father looked between them, noting the way they gravitated toward each other, the warmth in their eyes when they exchanged glances. "Something tells me the courting's already been done," he said dryly, "but I appreciate the gesture all the same." The news of Montgomery's crime spread quickly through Promise Creek. The 3 properties he had stolen from his murdered wives were returned to their rightful heirs, and Montgomery himself, having survived his wound, was transported to Denver to stand trial. Grant resigned his position as marshal, using his savings to purchase a small ranch adjacent to the Lowry property. The land had good water and fertile soil, perfect for the future he envisioned. Through the summer, he and Grace spent every possible moment together. He helped her father rebuild the struggling Lowry ranch, and she helped him plan the house they would share. They talked for hours, learning each other's histories, dreams, and fears, the connection between them deepening with each passing day. On a golden evening in early September, 6 months after their escape from Montgomery's ranch, Grant took Grace to a hilltop overlooking both properties. A picnic basket lay between them as they watched the sunset paint the sky in spectacular hues of orange and purple. "I've been thinking," Grant said, his voice unusually hesitant, "about what you said that night in the line shack, about life being too short to waste." Grace smiled, remembering. "I meant it then. I mean it even more now." Grant reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I had this made in Denver," he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold band set with a single pearl. "It's not fancy, but it's perfect," Grace breathed, her eyes shining. "Grace Lowry," Grant said, taking her hand. "These past months have been the happiest of my life. I know our beginning was unusual, to say the least, but I thank God every day for bringing you into my life. Will you marry me? Not because I rescued you, or because of any promise made in desperation, but because we've found something rare and precious together." Tears of happiness spilled down Grace's cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms for a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and devotion. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Promise Creek, with Martha and Tom Wilson standing as witnesses. The Wilsons had decided to settle nearby, Tom taking a position as deputy to the local sheriff. Martha had become a dear friend to Grace, offering guidance and wisdom as she prepared for married life. After the ceremony, as friends and family gathered at the Lowry Ranch for the celebration, Grace found a moment alone with her new husband on the porch. "Happy, Mrs. Dawson?" Grant asked, his arms encircling her waist. "Completely," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "Though I still can't believe how our story began. A marshal pretending to be a hired gun, rescuing a reluctant bride from a murderer." Grant chuckled. "Not the conventional way to find a wife, I'll admit." "I remember your words so clearly," Grace mused. "She'll be my bride," you said, so confident for a man who just met me. "I knew the moment I saw you," Grant said simply. "Some things you just know." Inside, someone struck up a fiddle tune and laughter spilled through the open windows. Grant offered his hand with a formal bow. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Dawson?" Grace placed her hand in his, where it fit perfectly. "This one and all the others, Mr. Dawson." As they joined the dancing inside, Grace caught her father's eye across the room. He raised his glass in a silent toast, his expression one of pure contentment. Her brothers, growing tall now, watched the celebration with wide eyes, their future secure. In the year that followed, Grant and Grace built their life together with patience and love. The house they constructed on Grant's property combined beauty and practicality, with large windows to capture the mountain views and bookshelves filled with volumes Grace had only dreamed of owning. True to his original calling, Grant began teaching the children of neighboring ranches 3 days a week, using a converted barn as a schoolhouse. Grace often assisted him, discovering her own talent for education in the process. Their ranch prospered under their care, with a small herd of cattle and horses that grew steadily each season. They worked side by side, equal partners in every sense, their bond strengthening through shared challenges and triumphs. News eventually reached them that Silas Montgomery had been convicted and hanged for his crimes. The day they received word, Grace and Grant visited the small marker they had placed for Mrs. Finch on their property, leaving wildflowers to honor her sacrifice. "She would be pleased," Grace said softly, "to know justice was finally served." On their first anniversary, as they sat before the fireplace in their home, Grant presented Grace with a journal bound in soft leather. "What's this for?" she asked, running her fingers over the blank pages. "For our story," he replied. "For the children and grandchildren who will want to know how it all began." Grace smiled, imagining those future generations. "It's quite a tale. The reluctant bride and the marshal who claimed her." "Who saved each other," Grant corrected gently. "For I was as lost as you were, until that day on the road to Montgomery's ranch." Later that spring, their family began to grow with the birth of their first child, a daughter they named Elizabeth Finch Dawson, in honor of Montgomery's last wife and the housekeeper who had given her life for theirs. The baby had her father's blue eyes and her mother's determination, screaming lustily as she entered the world. As Grace nursed their daughter in the rocking chair Grant had crafted, she watched her husband move about the room, his face transformed by the wonder of new fatherhood. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Giving up the badge, the adventure?" Grant knelt beside the rocking chair, gently touching his daughter's tiny hand. "Not for a single moment," he said with absolute conviction. "This is the greatest adventure of all." Outside their window, the land stretched toward the mountains, green with spring promise. Their cattle grazed peacefully in the distance, and the garden Grace had planted was beginning to sprout. The world beyond might still hold danger and uncertainty, but here, in this home they had built together, there was only love and possibility. "She'll be my bride," Grace quoted softly, smiling at the memory. "Such presumption, Marshal Dawson." Grant kissed her forehead tenderly. "Such certainty, Mrs. Dawson. And I've never been more right about anything in my life." As twilight settled over their land, they sat together in peaceful contentment, their daughter sleeping between them, the future stretching before them like an open road, a future they would travel side by side, just as they had from that first fateful day when a marshal rode in and changed everything with 5 simple words.